So I did get some pizza, so I might perform good. All right, everybody ready, or just need some more time to eat? Else I'm just going to start so that we can finish up a little bit early. My presentation is not going to be as long, and I'm actually very happy Minos talked a little bit more about the theory. Then I don't need to explain certain things. I'm going to go for a little bit more of a practical approach, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I performed a performance tuning workshop based on the work Minos created, and how our customer increased their performance drastically, whatever. All right, so this is actually going to be a case study of a customer of ours. And this customer is the Finnish National Betting Agency. I'm not sure if anybody been in Finland before during winter time. Yeah, it kind of looks like this. And this is actually, well, this wasn't a photo I made, but this is actually the circumstances I was there at. So there was a blizzard, a snowstorm, whatever was there. And the funny thing is that during this time that nobody's, well, some people are outside. I mean, Finnish people can pretty much do anything, even during these kind of circumstances. But a lot of them are actually inside of one of these casinos and gambling all day. And that's what makes this company I worked with so successful.
It was a summer day, right?
Yeah, so the thing is, I went about 3 times to this customer, and they always invite me somewhere in the time where they have the shortest days. So I'm actually I'm so happy that I get back to the Netherlands because of the weather for once. All right. So the customer asked me to go there on site for about 3 or 4 days. In this case, it was 3 days. They had some production problems, so I didn't really know what I was getting myself into when I got there. So I got there, and they would explain to me the situation. They had site outages about 8 times a day. On a good day, it was about 4 times. They suffered from poor performance, high memory consumption, and high CPU loads. And they could actually show me, you know, like on some graphs. One thing they did very well is that they set up their infrastructure so good. I mean, they had insights, measurements about everything. So they had measurements about CPU utilization, memory load. They know exactly what happened when, push a button, things would get redeployed. There was this CDN thing in front of everything, caching all kinds of responses, but still things sometimes went a bit wrong. If we take a look at this graph, you might not read the bottom. So these spikes you see here are during the day. And every time there's a spike, there's an outage. So this would be about the 24th of January. You could see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 outages that happened that day. And this orange line would be the memory utilization. And this blue line, you could see it was kind of low. And then it hit kind of a problem, and then everything went down. So the delivery tiers, so the side nodes did go down, but because they had such good infrastructure, the actual site was still up. So just maybe a note here is that they were using our delivery tier just for REST endpoints. So they had a single page application in front, and they were utilizing our JAX-REST plain endpoints and the content pipeline for serving some content. Anyway. All right, so once they showed me what their current problem is and what they were facing with, the first thing I could come up with, let's do a 3-day performance tuning workshop. It perfectly fits in what their problems they're currently having, and let's see where we can get. And 3 days, I think, like Minos mentioned, is quite short for this kind of workshop. So that really required some planning, you know, and I would discuss with them on what the expectations are. So the expectations from them of me is that at the end of these 3 days, I'm going to get you a report of items which indicates bad performance and suggestions on how to fix it. Of course, you can't give them a full guarantee, but at least at the end of those 3 days, you're going to get somewhere. You're probably going to get better performance. I'm not sure if I'm going to fix all your problems, but at least we'll know some indicators of the problems you're currently having. All right, so the more important thing was, what did I expect from them? So this was a very important one. Full cooperation, access to their source. I don't know, things like, oh, we have to go through, I don't know, a certain process and get you some accounts 2 weeks later. No, I'm going to get access to the source directly, or I'm going to get a zip file from somewhere. I'm not going to wait any longer. We just have these 3 days to work on this thing. Another thing I really required for them to have, I think Minos mentioned it, is access to the environments and their engineers. So not only the application developers, but also the DevOps engineers. And that's how we actually formed a task force for those 3 days. We even had a Slack channel called Hippo Task Force. We were working next to each other, and whenever I, for example, wanted an environment where I could do some tests with some new ideas or some new fixes for some things I found in the checklist, we could just get it up, add the production content in it, and start using some tests. So it required a lot of it required a lot of teamwork also from them. No bureaucracy, just get right to it. And it really happened, you know. They really were full cooperating. But also to mention a little bit about that, there were a lot of guys which actually were so sick of things going down that they really were looking for a weekend where they did not have to take their laptop at home. Yeah, it was that bad at a certain point of time. Yeah. All right, so that's when we began. So the first step was informing them on how are we going to perform this. So a small introduction on the performance tuning workshop. We would go a little bit through the process and the overview, and then of course during those 3 analysis categories, we had a checklist which we would go through, which I'm also going to show you momentarily. So this slide is something I stole from Minos's previous presentation. So the workshop overview. So we have the infrastructure level analysis, we have the product usage and configuration analysis, and the application analysis. So we would first start with the infrastructure. It's kind of most easiest, or actually the easiest one, which we can pinpoint some problems. And right afterwards, product usage and configuration analysis, which we could spot some issues quite fast. And actually the most difficult one was the application analysis, which we could spot problems quite easily, but fixing them would take a bit more time. And I'll explain that a little bit later as well. So we will have this checklist, and we will go through them one by one and just see what we can find. So infrastructure, product usage and configuration, and application analysis. All right, so first up, infrastructure level analysis. It's performed by the DevOps engineer and me as a consultant. We would sit next to each other. We would go through the checklist, and we would check them off one by one. Previously, I did this workshop with a customer remote, and I was not sitting next to him. And I would send him a checklist of items he would need to perform and share with me. It was like, yeah, it kind of works. I think it's okay. So it was very important actually just doing this together and not having them do it on their own. All right, so I'm gonna go through a couple of items of this checklist. So for each level analysis, I'm gonna go through a couple of items, which I'm going to highlight. There are a lot of more, but I'm just going to highlight a couple of analysis. So one of the first things that we went through is, are our system requirements met? And usually they would say, yeah, of course they're met or whatever. But actually, we did find out that they were not using the latest MySQL version, which was supported in 11. So that's the version they were using, and so they were using 5.6, and the supported version was 5.7, and 5.6 was going to be end of life February 2018. So it was very important for us to actually upgrade that. Not sure if it had anything to do with their performance, probably not. But anyways, let's go through it. Like Nino said, maintenance, you need to maintain your system very frequently. And so this is the only item which we found that was not met. And don't forget, we got a full page, onehippo.org, which will mention all the system requirements, also which browsers are supported. And always start out with the easy list and just check things off. All right, this one is going to be a little bit more complicated to explain. And this is number 8 from the infrastructure level analysis. Is the database server healthy? So here we found some really, really weird things. And I would sit next to the DevOps engineer and I would ask him, all right, let's just go through the tables and see what's happening there. And well, probably some of you know there are some tables in MySQL, like the repository local revision and the repository journal. And one of these tables had over 200,000 plus entries in the database. Well, actually, it should just be the amount of nodes which are currently running. So what happened is, what we find out is that every time they would start up a node, like a site or CMS node, it would be, for example, started with, so it would be a Docker container. And what they did is that they would use the Docker container ID as a cluster ID. So every time a side node would go down, they would start up another one and it would get registered as a new node in JCR. So probably somewhere around the couple of years they were running Hippo or BloomReach Experience, in this case, a lot of side nodes went down. Then containers got started up and new cluster IDs were registered. And this happened approximately 200,000 times in 2 years. And yeah, they didn't really have insight. I'm not sure what the impact is of having these 200,000.
It takes forever to start.
Yeah, it could be. I was actually not sure, but it can't be good.
Even your registry checker takes
exactly.
ages.
So I could imagine that there is probably some process in the background going on which will actually check all of these different nodes if they're still running, or do they need syncing or whatever. But I'm not sure. But anyway.
You have the journal table can't be cleaned up. That's the biggest problem. So the journal table can be cleaned up until the lowest, so you have 200,000 listed nodes now, and one is lagging really far behind. So the journal table can't be cleaned up after that one. So yeah, but that one never gets up anymore, so it will never be updated. And also, by the way, but if they start new Docker instances, what did they do with the Lucene indices?
They would copy them to S3 bucket and would copy them back whenever they start up a new container. They would have some scripts which copy it from the last one and copy it back in from another one.
Yeah, but then then you also need to create an entry in the local revisions how far that current index is. Otherwise, it's going to replay the index creation anyways.
I think they did it as well, so they would copy the revision as well and put it back. And they were not sure 100% how they did it, but
if they did it correctly, then it doesn't matter that the repository was quite large, because it's never read fully.
No, indeed, it is just no.
But it does have an effect on MySQL query cache.
Yeah.
It can blow up your memory and affect other queries that are more important.
But to be sure, our BloomReach Cloud had the same thing. So they also had a lot of entries in the local revisions. But Infra just has a script that has some heuristics about which one is used in most pages.
Exactly, that was the solution. We just created a script in a moment to remove everything which was actually not used, and that's how we cleaned up or actually made the database server healthy again. And we could find a lot of information about database repository maintenance on the link below, and it will just give you a couple of pointers on how this concept exactly works with the repository local revision table and what it's actually about.
Oh, one more thing, by the way, I also think the local revisions, they don't have a primary key. So then 200,000 entries is quite, they are not indexed. That's what one Sunday recently, I think, posted to check that list. But because normally it's just like 5, because it's a number of nodes, you don't need a primary key. So that if you have 200,000 entries, no primary key, well, it might help.
Because then they are indexed.
Sorry?
Because then they are indexed.
Yeah.
Yes. So that was kind of it regarding the infrastructure level analysis. There were a couple of items more, but I think it's not that worthy of mentioning right here. All right, next up was the product usage and configuration analysis. And this is something we would work with all three types of developers. So there was the DevOps engineer, which was part of it, the application developer, and me as the consultant. And I want to highlight these items in the checklist. So is the project running the latest maintenance version, complex document types, big number of documents in the folder. And I'm going to also mention the scripts we actually executed to get some more insight. And is the repository.xml misconfigured? All right, so yes, they were running an older version of the CMS or BloomReach experience, and they were not running the latest maintenance version. So this is actually one of the easiest ones to spot and also to fix. And at that time, they were running 11.1.0, and now I think it's already 12.2.5 or 12.2.6 even. And it's very just easy to check. Go to our release notes pages, and I'll also check in each step in between what do they need to do to perform the upgrade. So very easy to fix. So within the time frame of 3 days, it would just take 10 minutes max. All right, so next up, are there any complex document types? So we have two ways of investigating this. And one of those is the configuration diagnostic script, which I'm going to get to. But the other one, what we also created a very long time ago, is the namespace visualizer, which will actually give you a nice graph on how each document is related to each other. And the reason this tool once got developed is that we used to get, I think it was the one you performed the performance tuning workshop at, is that we would get this request to do a review on the content model of this customer. And we kind of estimated, oh yeah, it will just take like 2 or 3 days. We're gonna take to look through all your document types. It's gonna be easy. And then we got the source code, and we find out there were 120 document types in there. And my kind of assumption is I'm going to go through them one by one, and I'm kind of going to form an idea on how they look like in relation to each other, and I'm going to find out which compounds or document types are actually not that useful to use anymore. Yeah, we could not do that with 120 document types. So we created this namespace visualizer tool to just give you a nice overview of the relationship between document types, and it can be quite useful, especially if you want to see if there are some document types which are very similar and are actually maybe better to merge them to one, or maybe there are some compounds just used on one document type. What's the use for it if you're not going to use them multiple times?
Can I just give a side note?
Yeah, of course.
So this one, I've asked Kenan to make it part of the workshop because it's a nice one, and we just discussed where is the location of this solution and stuff. But it would be nice to make this more official part of the workshop. And I also want to mention the other visualizer, the HST visualizer that uses the same exact engine, because I stole it from Kenan. They use the same engine to do a graph on your HST configuration, show you cycle items that are linking to pages and reusability of pages.
But those are getting more and more complicated. The HST model changing, yeah. All right. So next up was the configuration diagnostic scripts I ran, and this would actually show me the numbers a little bit more in detail. So this is actually running the Groovy scripts, and one of the things I analyzed are the document types. So we would have this magazine article, which would have 24 fields, for example. Then we would have second in a row the sports article with 23, and then the loyalty advantage of 21. Actually, based on the performance tuning workshop I've performed before this one, I had numbers which were in the 80 range. So whenever you would open up a document, 80 fields would show up on your screen. So in regard to that, I found these one to be quite acceptable. They were still not that small, but still acceptable. All right. So next up was the amount of documents within a folder. So in this case, I ran the content sizing script. So the result of the content sizing script would show certain hotspots in your document tree, which would have tremendous amount of documents. And even just thinking about the reason why would you have that many documents within a folder? I mean, you wouldn't be able to find them very easily. So I ran the script, and actually the output of the script is quite big, so it would go through each folder and show you the amount of documents. And I'm highlighting here 3 folders. The first one contains 804 documents. The second one, 574, and the third one was the biggest. They would have over 1,000 documents within one folder. And the funny thing is, they would actually have REST endpoints retrieving all these documents and serializing them to JSON and returning it as a response back to the SPA. So that functionality is actually a little bit more in regard to the application level analysis. But in any case, we could spot some hotspots in their content tree, which we could actually do something about. And actually, based on these scripts, we at the workshop we created some subscripts which would actually get all these documents and add them into intermediate folder based on year, month, and day, for example.
Did they give a reason on why there were so many documents collected?
Yeah, so regarding this project, it was kind of very funny. So sometimes you go at a customer and they would say, and every time I would go there, they would have different developers, a different team, and this was exactly the same case. So I got there, there were new developers, everything. They say, okay, there's some legacy code left behind from the guys who were here before. I'm not sure what it does or what happened. So this is this is how it went. Yeah, exactly. It just happened somehow, and nobody knows how or why, how they got there. Yeah. Yeah. So, all right, yes, so I talked a little bit about a solution is creating intermediate folders, and we created just a Groovy script which does this. And it would be very easy. I would point in the Groovy script, I would give as a parameter the folder. I would also give as a parameter the property of the date field, and it would automatically start moving those documents within those folders.
Created. Created. So it was created. The date it was created.
Yeah. Yes. The date it was created. Yes. Yeah. And that's a property which is stored. All right. Next up, I actually would never really think about it. Is checking the repository.xml. And the thing is, sometimes you can't even check it in your local project. You really need to check the environments, what the repository.xml is. And that would, of course, require you to have the DevOps engineer to go there and look at it.
And just I want to add to that, you must be very resilient with that DevOps engineer, because even if he tells you that, yes, this is the one from acceptance, no, double check it, double verify it, because there are like 3 ways that you can specify the repository.xml to your application. So maybe this DevOps is aware of one way to do it, but somebody has overridden this way with another way. System property or something. Right? So it can be quite tricky. You need to be sure that you're reading the right repository.xml for the right environment.
Also realize the repository.xml is a template. So
yes,
from the repository.xml,
you should get it from the workspace.
Yeah, so you should actually look at the workspace. The workspace is really short. Because repository.xml is just used and the workspace.xml is created out of it. So if you replace the repository.xml, but you have the same workspace.xml and
It will change.
But do you then also ask for the startup scripts, for example, because then there's the URL where it has to go to?
Yeah, I would ask everything, like show them to me, like show your script, show me your the repository, show me like actually all the files which are required to start up the application. What way are you doing it? Everything.
I tried once to get information that is only specified in repository.xml. I tried to get information programmatic. So I tried to read a property from the repository.xml that, okay, the repository.xml is full of properties. These properties end up somewhere in your Java thing that's running, your memory, right? So I was expecting that there will be some class from Wicked, from Basis, from somewhere to at least read one value to compare that indeed it is the correct one. But there is no way to do that because it's really.
You can't like from you can't like.
I could only debug and use IntelliJ to read the value of private method because this is not exposed. This configuration is.
You can't even expose it like to the console. You have it.
No, you cannot. You can at the moment.
You probably have to debug Tomcat itself.
You need to, yeah, you need to debug it and then you need to run to execute some private methods. That is the situation. Private data structure.
All right.
It would just be an easy way to.
Yeah, I would really like it in the console. Like you have so many statistics you can see in the CMS themselves. You can see like what Java version you're running. And
There's nothing from the first.
And it's also probably also something to do with when you were able to read the repository XML, you can also read the other one where all your passwords are in, and that makes it a security vulnerability. So that's probably the reason why you can't.
Yes, it's very, very good. You see it in the code as well. There's nothing in the code that exposes these binaries.
All right, and actually then it got interesting. I was actually, the first thing I would do is I would compare it, I would check out an archetype project, I would look up the repository XML, and I would start comparing things, and there were so many things off, it was ridiculous. Like my SQL drivers, which were completely different classes, they would have like an old facet navigation engine class in there. They would have, for example, the query size was actually set from 1,000 to 10 or 100,000. There were a lot of things, and I actually started wondering, where does this repository XML come from, these values? And I was actually checking out each version to see, and I got, it was a repository XML from 7.8. Yeah, it was quite an old one, it was never upgraded. Yeah. It somehow just worked, and yeah, and people just continue on working with it. So I'm not sure exactly what impact it had, but I think it had quite an impact, just upgrading the repository XML to the recent one and changing some values in there.
Did you also have to upgrade your MySQL drivers then?
They were using other ones that were, yeah.
And they use the same last names, right? So 10, 12
years.
They were probably deprecated or something.
Well, yeah, there was one case, well, not deprecated, but there was one case with performance problems from a client, and the actual reason was that the JDBC driver that they were using found a leak. Was it the latest version? Was it an outdated one? I don't know, but it found a leak.
Probably using
Because
that
I found
one.
this
Huh? What happened? What happened? Where was it?
Resource leak or?
JDBC driver.
JDBC driver memory leak.
Ah.
Yeah.
All right. So the last item was the application level analysis, and DevOps engineer could rest. This is something the consultant and the application developer would actually investigate. And some items which we would investigate and were very quite common, I think Niels mentioned it in the last presentation as well, is first, one of the things, do HT queries return result sets with reasonable sizes? And we actually find out that a lot of components in their application were not setting any kind of limits. And even so, the repository XML was configured to retrieve 10 or 100,000 documents. Yeah, so this had to change. So we would just check all the components which they at least need to set some kind of limits. I'm not sure what application requires you to read 1,000 documents at once. And it has to do, well, and going a little bit deeper in their situation, it was that the front-end developers were lazy. They would just like to have all the documents somewhere, you know, in the single-page application to do some things. And anyway, so another thing which is actually very common, and this is something I copied from their code, is using custom JCR expression to the query. Does anybody know what this one does? Yeah. So this would actually execute a query to retrieve a document with the name, the JCR name. And it would use this fn name function. And it's something that happens somehow quite frequent. I'm not sure why, but it happens quite frequent. And so what you would actually want as a best practice is you want to search for properties on a document, not actually the node name itself. Anybody know like a solution which we could fix this with? Still retaining.
Why are you not looking for the node name? Why is that?
Because that function is quite expensive to search for.
Okay,
It's expensive. Yeah. And pretty much everything, every query with the @JCR expression, if you can't resolve it with the HST query API, you should actually just not use it, or actually to a different way of doing it. So in any case, we still needed this functionality to work, but we would do it in a bit different way. I think how we solve this is that we would add, that's a bit of a strange way we actually solved it, is that we would hook into the workflow event and we would store the node name as a property of the document. Yeah, but we, of course, that also came with a lot of actually things we would need to think about. So every time you create a new document, every time you copy a new document, this functionality has to be triggered.
So you also use export, right? Like you can specify the name of the node and the type of the node.
But you do know the
You don't need to know the type.
it depends. I don't know exactly what the export here was, but yeah. I would also expect that //
Yeah, exactly.
the name of the node.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably didn't. I don't know.
So anyway, to solve this, we had to do a couple of things, work into the SCXML workflow engine and add a property to the document so that it can be queried the right way in regard to our best practices.
Kind of vaguely remember that. I think we indexed name as a pseudo property as well. So there's
Yes.
some hidden property that.
Yeah, but I couldn't find it. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I think I was looking for it.
yes,
as well.
I think actually there was, I'm not sure, there was used to be like a JCR name property like a long time ago that was actually stored in there, but I couldn't find anything.
No, I thought so as well. Also thought
Would be nice though. Yeah.
You could have asked.
Yeah.
I think there are actually some integration tests. I think.
So next time I'm going to bother you with this. And actually another thing I was thinking about, maybe to solve it with derived data. But with derived data, I was not able to get the node name. Yeah.
If you use the repo, the repository, can you see those slides, those attributes?
No, you would need to open the machine index, and that's not good idea. But I'm quite sure we have something for that we index in node names because we.
Could be a configuration repository.xml perhaps?
No, it's not a configuration, it's by default. Because I think we also also index the node name on the node scope for free text searching. We already look into this process. So. Anyway, I think it's.
Whenever you remember, please let me know. Because I see this quite often, especially with code reviews. This happens quite often.
But you can look at code yourself as well.
But yeah, but now you inspired me to ask you. So.
Send myself a reminder.
All right. Yeah, I know. I'm gonna go through it as fast as possible. So next up, this is one I see, I think, in every project I look at, and date range queries being used in queries without resolution. So this would be actually the query being executed, and there is this whole blog post on how you should use these resolutions, and the resolutions will make sure that your date range queries perform much better. Not gonna go into more detail because of time, but yeah. All right, so on behalf of testing, what did we do? So we noticed certain violations, we applied certain fix for it, but what I did ask of them is I want to have an environment available with production content. And for testing purposes, make that environment quite small so that we can kind of easily trigger bad performance. And performance tests, you mentioned we have the option to use gmeter, Gatlin. I myself, for this case, I used AB Apache benchmark just to do some quick tests and trying to able to trigger some outages. And during that time, I would actually monitor the HTTP diagnostic to see if there were some results, which would take a tremendous amount of time, or even see if they improved every time we did a new deploy. All right, like I said, these guys had a really good infrastructure setup. We would have a test environment, but we also did have an acceptance environment, but we just pushed to production anyway. You know, they had this really, I don't know, I really like their infrastructure. They were running on AWS, and they would have this cloud front up front, and we sometimes even deployed something which was not working. So the thing is that the result would end up with a 500 error, but because this CloudFront was in front, they would just still give back the old. Yeah, it was amazing. You know, I've never seen people deploy this fast to production. I think in those 3 days we deployed maybe 14, 15 times to production, and these guys are well known to deploy over 200 times a month to production. Before, I think that's like the case with them. They set up the infrastructure that well. So. Bravo on their outstanding infrastructure. Eventually I asked, it took them more than a year to create it, but it works really well. All right, and then of course, let's start collecting some results. So those were the outages before, and this was after we deployed it after, I think, the end of the second day. So let's zoom in on that. It looks already a little bit better. Very good. What happened after a couple of more days? The guy did not have to take his laptop back home, and yes. So what they are currently fixing, so we have fixed a lot of the infrastructure level items, the product, the configuration ones, but we haven't fixed all the applications. So I've given them the list of items they need to fix, and it could be potential that they have a resource leak because their memory usage is kind of slowly going up here. So they're still working on that. I haven't heard back from them, but expect it to be solved. All right, that was it. Thank you.